I think that conversation is such a powerful tool, and it's something that in a vacuum we take for granted a little bit because all we do all day long is talk to each other and we have these conversations, and sometimes they go deeper than others do and what have you. But on a surface, like, the power of conversation, the power of communication is ultimately how we navigate our way through life.
Welcome to Tad Voices. I'm Nick.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Lawson, and we're friends who are here to talk about mental health.
We are by no means experts in this field, nor is this a substitute for professional help, but we can promise open and vulnerable conversations that highlight the strength of some amazing people who have decided to share their story with us.
Talk, share, help, and thanks for listening.
We're excited to welcome actor and producer Phil Lubin to the podcast. A mental health coach and advocate, Phil joins us from sunny Southern California. There, he's been producing a film titled Soft, and also recently helped virtually host our Let's Move workout campaign to raise awareness for all the great work we are doing at TAD. Thank you for joining us today, Phil Lubin.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm really excited and happy to be here.
Well, we're excited too, and I just kind of want to know, what you've been up to lately and how are you keeping busy?
What have I been up to? Well, that Soft film that you're referring to, we just finished that up, or we have just adding the credits in, and then we'll be done. But we submitted to the Berlin Film Festival on Monday of last week, which was a really big win for us. So that's been keeping us busy, or keeping me busy, rather. And then have some personal training clients that I'm working with, and just trying to stay as active as I can to keep my mind off of this second wave that they talked about back in April that is hitting all of us pretty full force.
Right. And just to kind of expand on that, that must have been kind of an interesting and challenging time as well. Producing a movie during, I'm sure there were certain restrictions and whatnot, kind of, trying to deal with all that. How did that work?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So we were supposed to shoot originally March 27th. And so obviously when the pandemic hit, which I think was March 17th, was sort of when the world flipped on its head. It pushed everything back, which ended up being a blessing in disguise in many ways. However, with every other industry being impacted as well, the entertainment business is certainly the same. And the protocols to get into production were pretty hefty. And so, being a small, short film with a very limited budget, we realized pretty quickly that about a third of the money that we had raised was going to have to go towards COVID compliance issues, which we were not prepped for, as no production was. So we ended up pushing our shoot back to August. We were able to wait until free testing became available here in LA, so that way we didn't have to pay out of pocket for that. But then just going through the union kind of rigmarole to get everything squared away, to make sure that all of our talent was safe, to make sure that our crew was safe, to make sure that when we were bringing food into set, that everybody kind of had their own thing. It was a really interesting kind of heavy lifting learning experience, but we persevered, and I'm very proud of that, because a lot of productions weren't able to get through it for several different reasons. But we were able to kind of to push through and shoot and get our project out. So it was really exciting.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations. I mean, that's no small feat in a regular year, but with
Right.
COVID, I mean, that's incredible, and congratulations. That's really
you.
exciting.
Thank you.
So jumping in a little bit to just how you were connected with TAD and the Let's Move, you mentioned getting active and staying active is something that's part of your daily routine. And so just curious to hear about how you got connected with TAD and the Let's Move event.
Yeah, so I got connected with TAD originally through Britt Bronson, who runs an organization out here in LA called space movement and conjunction with space movement. Campaign Out of My Mind, which I got actively involved in when she first launched that. And so aside from acting and producing, to know I have a living here in LA, I do personal training and group fitness training as well. So when Ben and Britt were connecting over the Let's Move campaign, and I had done a lot of stuff with Britt in the past, talking on a Nike Expo and leading another event that she did, and they do these Tuesday night kind of talks. She was like, I have somebody in mind that I think would be really great to lead the Let's Move class. And it was fun for me because it was my first time actually since the pandemic hit really doing anything in the physical fitness space in terms of leading a group. So it was a great way for me to not only jump back into leading classes, but also, really kind of reconnect into the why behind why I became an advocate in the mental health space, and kind of realigning myself with, events like Let's Move that move the needle for the conversation around mental health, and able to open up sort of my journey in that as well. So it was an incredible event, and I was really happy to be a part of it, and I think it was really successful.
And well, once again, we thank you for leading us through that. And I think that's a great way to transition kind of into my next question, that why piece that you were talking about. So maybe if you could just kind of take us through your own mental health or physical health journey, and then ultimately how that ended up leading you to kind of, commit yourself to this health and wellness aspect of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I openly struggle with depression and anxiety, and the anxiety piece is something that really reared its head, kind of unbeknownst to me when the pandemic hit, and which I'll get to. But um, it was funny because when I first met Ben and listened to Tad and how you guys came about in a vacuum, it was very similar to my story being an athlete through high school into college, that I was a basketball player, that my quote unquote career kind of got cut short with injuries. And I had so much of my identity wrapped up in this thing that I was trying to become. And you kind of put all your eggs in this basket of achieving this goal, of this dream towards being this pro athlete, or even, to get to college. I had more realistic understanding that, like, I'm a white Jew from Chicago, I'm not going to the NBA, but like trying to achieve this thing at a high level. I went to University of Illinois to play, and breaking both my feet and both my ankles and my legs, and tearing both my knees, and back injuries and shoulder, and all of this happening before I was 16 years old. It just sort of started to creep into a belief system of who I was, but then also really made me struggle with how I fit into this world. I had been so much this one thing for such a long time. And so really over the past 15 years or so, there's been this tug of war in terms of who I was and who I'm trying to become. And, and so as it relates to Tad specifically, just the athletic piece was a very big kind of trigger of mine that hit close to home. But separate from that, and just mental health being what it is, it's genetic and it's hereditary. And my dad's side of the family, all of us have, different mental health things that we struggle with, whether it be depression, whether it be anxiety, whether it be bipolar, whether it be manic depressive, whether it be, sort of a blend of all of those. Those are also like genetically encoded within just who I am. And so that was a piece of it as well. And then really with this pandemic, it was an interesting an interesting struggle where the pandemic hit and was kind of a perfect storm of a lot of things that I was battling. I've been kind of on and off medication for depression for the better part of 15 years. And it's something that I know in my core is not something that you can beat, so to speak. It's like if you have diabetes, you have to take your insulin. And if you don't, like, then there's other ramifications, and mental health works very similarly. So, Thanksgiving about a year ago, this time, like Thanksgiving last year, I got off my medication without telling anybody, thinking that I could just beat this thing. And I was okay for a while. And then as kind of the pandemic hit and both of my professions, entertainment and fitness, got pulled out from under me, and I was finally starting to get a big push of momentum with the entertainment side of things, and literally being quarantined as we all were, it just kind of broke me. And so went through some big downfall, big downward spiral that I'm grateful to say that I'm through and on the other side of, and have had a lot of reflection in this 7 months that I'm incredibly grateful for. But yeah, it comes and goes, and I know that we can get in, and we'll get into a little bit more of that. So, answer of some sort.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing. That's the pandemic certainly, I feel like sometimes when you're just sitting, nothing going on, exacerbates things that you talk about reflection. I think for all of us too, that is an important piece of what quarantine has brought. And so, I'm curious to hear about, you talk about the past 15 years, difficult moments, that downward spiral. What helped you in those moments, and sort of what helped you, or what you think that you could have done differently in the past, or early on, or you also talked about identity being wrapped up in athletics and things like that. As you look back, and not necessarily just in quarantine, but just on your journey, are there things that really helped you in those difficult moments? And are there things that you, looking back, feel like you would have done differently?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like, therapy and speaking is such an incredibly powerful tool. And my goal, and one of the reasons that I wanted to start being more vocal about driving mental health advocacy, is the stigma around therapy, around mental health at large, around just the disease that is mental health. The fact that you kind of have to fight to get insurance for some of these things, and I know that that's not really answering your question, which I will, but just kind of as a catalyst for all of it, like, being able to have a therapist, to have somebody to talk to have an outlet that is third party unbiased, is an incredibly powerful tool. And so I urge anybody that's listening that has been on the fence on whether they should work with somebody or reach out even to like a life coach. I think that tool is a game changer. So that's kind of a starting line where I've been in and out of therapy for the past 15 years. I've kind of reached a point now where I really understand the value of having somebody on your team, so to speak, at all times. And in conjunction with that, with identity and how we feel about ourselves and the stories that we hold on to from childhood, or the expectations that we think that we need to try to live up to from our parents, or from our peer group that we grow up in, or our friends, or whatever it might be. uh, I've found for me that the more communicative I am with my community of people about how I feel, what I'm going through, what my belief systems are, the more open that I am to not start to dive into a negative spiral and feel like I'm trapped. And so communication around um, my struggles or around just mental health at large, I have found to be the best medicine, so to speak. And I look back at things reflectively too, and it's something that feel like I speak out of both sides of my mouth a little bit because I didn't always do those things. And it's easy to get wrapped up in shame around certain ways that you feel about yourself, and you want to bury those because you don't want to expose those to others. And um, you know, kind of getting into a little bit more what I've gone through with this pandemic is like the pandemic hit, and I'd been unhappy with who I was, and feeling like I had been a failure or a disappointment to my parents because I moved to LA to become an actor, and I haven't been as financially successful as I would like to be yet, or what my ideas of what they might like to be. And because of that, I started really beating myself up about who I was, and that idea of how I felt about myself, I then projected outward into every part of my life. And it impacted my relationship with friends. It impacted my relationship to family, obviously your sense of self. And then it ultimately blew up my relationship with my girlfriend. And that was when I like really hit rock bottom. And, you know, so through this 7 months and getting back into therapy and kind of identifying these other things that were even going on um, within me, as I look back at the 7 months, the time leading up to it, the 15 years, had I had more courage to speak up to those closest in my life, to not try to hide parts of myself that I felt were the quote unquote like disappointing parts of myself, the ugly sides of ourself. I think that I would have been a lot more successful in controlling ultimately these two like full breakdown panic anxiety attacks that I have. That, by the way, scientifically, like when you get into those, they're out of your control and you're literally out of your mind in certain ways. It's not you that's in control, but I didn't know that at the time. I didn't have coping mechanisms to deal with those things at the time. So the conversation is one big piece. The second piece, which, you know, being an athlete and working in physical fitness and all of that, the scientific evidence behind the endorphin release from getting your heart rate up and exercise and working out, like you working those things out are another, just whether you deal with mental health or not, is just another thing that we should always be doing. And I've gone through phases where I'm like way more active than I am at other times in my life. I try to make it part of my daily, or at least 4 or 5 times a week, part of my routine, um, as just kind of a commonality throughout my you know existence, because that is a major help. And then, you know, which is a touchy subject for a lot of people too, and it was for me, and I, like I said earlier, I secretly got off medication, but get help. Like, if you have a headache, you take Advil, you take Tylenol, you do what you need to do to get rid of the headache. Like, you know, if you get a flu shot, you do what you need to do to take care of all these other physical ailments, but we don't think about it in terms of the mental. Get on the medicine that you need to be on, and stick with that program, because it pays off. It pays dividends in the end.
Well, we really appreciate you diving, into your story and sharing that with us, because you mentioned just normalizing, whether it be therapy or medication or whatever way you use to cope and deal with your struggles. I think the only way that that's normalized is if we have people like yourself who are coming on platforms like this and talking about it openly. So Yeah, we really appreciate you kind of going into that detail with us.
No, fully. And I think one of the things that, well, not one of the things, the thing that made me want to share my story was watching a few, I'm not going to call them celebrity friends of mine, but people that I know that became very vocal about their journey. And I think it's really easy to be a public figure and be able to be more open about certain things because you do have a platform. But sometimes for us, quote unquote, like regular people, that seems so out of reach because what some of these public figures have achieved is not normal. It's not the norm of everyday life. And so that inspired me to want to just be like, let me just be open about what I also go through because I feel like it's every bit as powerful, whether it's me telling my story or my friend Britt or you guys or whomever, like it's way more personal when it's someone that that comes forward with things than it is just to look at a celebrity icon or a public figure and be like, yeah, well, they go through it too, but their life is good in all these other ways. So um, I say that just because it made a big difference to me to want to be able to help share my story. If it just moved the needle on one other person's life, it was important enough for me to do that.
I think that's a really really important concept, and I do agree with you. I think it almost hits closer to home in a way when it's your friends, your family, or someone you identify a little more closely with, right? And if you have those open channels of communication,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have a huge Instagram following. I have like a few thousand people that follow me. And I remember when I first posted about it, I had a flood of messages to my inbox of people that are like, thank you for sharing your story. In fact, I will say this, like Britt, who is how I got tied into TAD with her space movement, she launched her company because she saw that I posted something. It gave her power to feel like she can come forward. I have another friend of mine in Chicago who did the same thing. And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn, other than it it does take like our our group of people, our own community of people to step out and step forward to empower others to do the same. There's a bit of a removal when it's people that are kind of like too far out of reach, uh, so to speak. So for those of you that are listening too, that are thinking about coming forward with it, like you don't know the impact that it makes to others that literally might sit across a desk from you every single day at work that might be going through the same thing. Um, and they're too vulnerable to come forward with it too. So I do encourage it.
Yeah, and I think that's a testament. It's a snowball effect, right?
Totally.
And the more people who are talking about it, the more people are going to be more comfortable about opening up about it. So that's a that's a great point. And not to go, I guess, too far back into our discussion here, but there was an interesting point that you brought up about identity that I just kind of wanted to touch back on. And it's really interesting because some of the other guests we've had on here, and I'm not sure if they're listening to the podcast beforehand, but that's a common theme that always comes up is like this sense of identity and what you represent. And I think it's just interesting, and I want to expand on a little bit and kind of get your thoughts. But do you think it's important to define yourself a little more broadly than just kind of in one kind of closed-minded sense, like not just being like an athlete, a scholar, or an actor? And whether or not you think that's true or not, I'll let you elaborate. And then kind of going off that, what would you say to somebody who feels like they've established this identity, and you mentioned yourself being an actor, and maybe having others, or just you perceiving others as not thinking you're as successful as you might want to be, and kind of just if you had that singular identity about yourself and you almost felt like the rug was being ripped out from underneath you, like this is gone, whether you're an athlete and you have injuries, something like that, and you're like, oh man, I've worked so hard for this is all I've wanted, and it's like gone. Kind of any advice for somebody going through something like that, how they might be able to cope or get through a situation?
Yeah, well, I think to start with, like, just tackling the idea of identity first is I've had a really interesting relationship to it, specifically with sports. Different from other parts of how I view myself, whether it be, I'm quote unquote like Dr. Phil to a lot of my friends, or how I try to like be an advocate in the mental health space, or what I'm trying to do on the creative side. What's really interesting about athletics is, and I wouldn't change any of it, but sports are the one thing in life where there is a finish line. And there's no other industry really that is that way. Like even LeBron James, like LeBron's going to have to stop at some point, and he's going to be 40 years old, and you have a lot of life left to live. I can audition for the rest of my life and never get a role and think that tomorrow's going to be my day, and and there is no ticking clock on that unless I choose to make that happen. And so to answer your question about identity is, I think that having an identity is really important because I think that it helps drive purpose, and I think that it helps drive targeted meaning towards what we are individually trying to achieve for ourselves, and hopefully then for others. I don't think that it necessarily means that you need to just have like this one defiant thing that this is who I am at all costs, which I've also struggled with as an actor. And that was kind of a big breakthrough for me in the past 7 months, where I've realized I'm like, you know what? If at some point it doesn't work, like I'm going to be okay figuring out like whatever else that thing might need to be. I'm certainly not at that place now, but like I'll be okay in life if like that's not it either. But it was really the sports one that, and I have listened to some of the other podcasts, and I know that it was a theme, and I didn't bring that up to try to narratively draw it together, other than it's the same thing that I've dealt with as well. But um yeah, the sports is really a tricky one, because it's less than 0.01% of us go on to be professional athletes. And yet I look back at the choices that I made, and I love sports and I excelled at them, and that's why I did it. But the amount of time and energy and investment that I put in through high school, when there were other interests like music and like acting and theater, and fashion even, that I just set aside to try to achieve this one thing that is almost unattainable, um, is really interesting. And so that's sort of my thought on that in terms of identity. But I will get back to that. I do think that that's a bit more kind of uniquely exclusive to athletics, where if you know that you want to be an accountant, if you know that you want to be a doctor, if you know that you want to be a firefighter, if you know that you want to be a teacher, if you don't know even necessarily what you like, but you're good at a lot of things, and like, then find those couple of things that you're passionate about and try to be all in on it, because that will help kind of shape, um, I think, who you are as a person better. And I think that we do need identity as people to not feel so lost. And I will be the first to admit that for the past 15 years, I struggled with this transition of athlete into wanting to be an actor, but there wasn't a lot of success there to start. And so am I really an actor or am I not? And just kind of grasping for straws until I finally had the confidence to just be like, screw it, this is me, this is what I'm doing, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. And I'm 33 years old, and that, you know, has taken a long time to get to. What was the second part of your question again? Because I want to make sure that I tackle it, and I know that it is around identity, but I want to make sure that I try to hit that too.
No, absolutely. It was a long-winded question on my part, but I think the second piece to that was just kind of, if you do feel like you have that identity, and then all of a sudden, it could be a variety of things that bring it on, but you just feel like it's been kind of ripped out from underneath you because you didn't succeed the way, you initially wanted to.
Then kind of where do you go from there?
And well, yeah, if you just had kind of any advice for somebody, going through something like that, or maybe
Yeah,
just through your own personal experiences, kind of how you would deal with
I think it's even kind of going back to what we talked about earlier with, things that I regret or would have done differently, or how to even cope with mental health at large, is I think that conversation is such a powerful tool. And it's something that in a vacuum we take for granted a little bit because all we do all day long is talk to each other and we have these conversations, and sometimes they go deeper than others do and what have you. But on a surface, like, the power of conversation, the power of communication is ultimately how we navigate our way through life. And so I think that if you are in a circumstance where your identity kind of gets ripped out from underneath you, or, there's a catalyst that promotes that, be open about having that conversation. Be vocal with the people that are close in your life that are going to help make decisions with you, that it is a struggle, that you don't know where to turn, that you need help. Asking for help, I never did, and I still struggle with, but it's incredibly powerful because most of us are wired to want to help other people. And then, if you've had something that has been so attached to your identity, like athletics has for so long, and that's gone, then that's okay. Kind of look inwardly at what else that you enjoy doing. And, if you're going after something that you enjoy, odds are you're going to be successful in it, and however you want to determine success. It might be financial, but it might just be intrinsic. It might be that you wake up and you're going to this thing that you love to do every single day, excuse me. And that's incredibly rewarding for you. So I think that's kind of would be my advice around it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that identity piece, COVID has taken a lot from people and stripped down a lot of what's going on. And as a coach, it's been a really interesting time. A college coach, like, we don't have sports, we don't have athletics anymore this year. And so
Yeah.
having that exact conversation and about broadening your scope of what makes you tick, and what, I think the more variety in there, there is, the more purpose you can find. And when unexpected things happen and that are out of your control, and sort of that piece of what drives you and what motivates you is taken away, I think we talk a lot about broadening your scope, and it's, that sounds like exactly what you're talking about, is just finding those other things that keep you going. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it's like, and I didn't know that you were a college coach, so I don't want it to seem like I was like dumping on sports, because that's
Oh, no, I was
certainly
like,
not the
I
thing. But
totally agree.
I think
totally agree.
that it's also, like, to your point, it's about leaning into other interests a little bit as well. And, things that might be of interest. If sports are the priority with, like, where you're at in your life, like, amazing. But if you have other things that you're also interested in as well, like, take those on a little bit too. Take them on as hobbies. See how those things feel, because, you know, whether it's sports or career or life or COVID, where all of our lives got turned upside down at the snap of a finger, like, it's gonna throw us curveballs no matter what. And so the more, we're able to be nimble through that and not be so kind of like rigidly stuck in, this is just the one thing that I do no matter what, I think the more equipped we will be for success.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, nimble's, that's a good word for it.
It's
And
been
none
my
offense taken, no
it's
worries.
it's been my word, or it's been my word of 2020 is nimble.
Perfect. That's perfect. Awesome. Well, we're bumping up against some time here, but don't want to take up too much of your time. But kind of how we like to wrap it up and ask people is just, what does mental and physical health, well-being look like to you? Whether it's in yourself or in other people, or when you think of well-being, what does that look like?
Well-being at large, and I'm not religious, but I'm pretty spiritual in terms of thinking that, your body, your mind, and your soul need to be aligned in order for you to be the kind of at your highest and best self. Um, and so when I think about wellness at large, it's trying to find alignment within those things, doing things every day that serve you for that. I'm a big believer in exercise. I don't think I even do it as much as I should, but I think that it's really important for us to get our body moving. We store so much tension emotionally, and this is also scientific, through our muscles, through our joints. We carry emotion in our body. We carry emotion in our organs. And so the more that we can move our energy, the more that it opens up then our physicality, it opens up our sexuality, it opens up our emotional life, and then it opens you up to being able to kind of align your spirit within that as well, because you're able to think clearly and your body's working in alignment with you. And so then you could be more connected, um, kind of at a spiritual soul to soul level as well. So that's my approach towards it. I am certainly not always successful in it, but that's kind of what the fight is, we get kicked down and how do we pick ourselves back up? And, so it's for me every day kind of that fight of the grind through the mental, through the physical, to get to kind of that soulful spiritual place where I do feel really connected.
Well, that's a great answer, and I think a fresh perspective for us. An answer that I haven't heard already, but I really like that answer, and I think unless Katie has anything to add, at least for me, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on and joining us. I really thoroughly enjoyed this interview. It was appreciated. You went into kind of your own experiences in great detail, and you're well spoken about it. So we really thank you.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you having me on and appreciate the work that you guys are doing to help, change the messaging around mental health advocacy and helping others that need it, because it's not a visible disease. And so I appreciate the work that you guys are doing and hope to be back on at some point too.